When my brother's voice came through the phone that Tuesday afternoon, I knew something was wrong. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Calm, almost cheerful, like he was announcing good news instead of tragedy. Mom died last night in an accident, he told me, his words measured and rehearsed. The funeral's tomorrow. She left everything to me. You won't be getting anything. He waited for me to break down, to scream, to beg. Instead, I smiled. Because my mother wasn't dead. She was sitting right beside me, alive and breathing, listening to her own son announce her death with the casual efficiency of someone checking off items on a to-do list. What my brother didn't know was that I'd been watching him erase our mother for years. Small erasures at first. Decisions made without consulting her. Doctor's appointments she supposedly missed. Papers she couldn't remember signing. Then bigger ones. Documents declaring her incompetent. A death certificate filed while her heart still beat. A funeral planned while she still breathed. He thought he'd gotten away with it. He thought he'd stolen everything. Her house, her money, her very existence, and that no one would ever know. But my mother knew, and she'd been planning her revenge from beyond a death that never happened. This is the story of how a woman came back from the dead to destroy the son who tried to bury her alive. It's about what happens when love turns into greed, when family becomes the enemy, and when the truth refuses to stay buried, no matter how deep someone tries to dig the grave. If you're ready to hear how far someone will go to erase the people they're supposed to protect, and how far a mother will go to make sure the truth survives her, then stay with me, because this story doesn't end the way my brother thought it would. Please follow the channel, like this video, and comment below telling me where you're watching from. Your support means everything and helps me keep bringing you these incredible true stories. I smiled when my brother told me our mother was dead. That's the part people never understand when I tell this story. They expect tears, shock, maybe denial. But when Marcus's voice came through the phone that Tuesday afternoon, flat, businesslike, almost cheerful, announcing that Mom had died the night before in some accident he didn't bother explaining, I felt my lips curl upward. Not a smirk, not bitterness, a genuine smile that started somewhere deep in my chest and worked its way to my face, like relief finally finding an exit. The funeral's tomorrow, he continued, barely pausing for breath. 1 o'clock at Riverside Memorial. I've already handled the arrangements. Oh, and Eleanor, you should know. Mom left everything to me. The house, the accounts, her jewelry collection, everything. The lawyer said it was all updated last month. Crystal clear, nothing contested. You won't be getting anything. I could hear his wife, Jessica, in the background. Her voice muffled, but distinct enough to catch the word finally. The coffee maker in my kitchen was gurgling its last drops into the pot. The afternoon light coming through my window had that particular autumn gold that happens around 3 o'clock in Connecticut, the kind that makes dust particles look like they're dancing on purpose. My wall clock, the one that used to hang in Mom's breakfast nook before she moved in with me, ticked steadily, marking seconds that Marcus apparently thought were the last of my mother's existence. Marcus, I said softly, and I could feel that smile widening. That's very interesting. There was a pause, a long one, the kind where you can almost hear someone's brain recalibrating because your reaction doesn't match their script. He'd expected fury, probably tears, maybe begging. Jessica definitely expected a scene. She'd been priming herself for my breakdown for months, I could tell. But what he got instead was my voice, calm as Sunday morning, with that strange warmth underneath that must have sounded completely wrong to him. I need to go, he said finally, his tone shifting just slightly. There's a lot to coordinate. I'm sure there is, I replied. The line went dead. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter, next to the pill organizer I'd filled that morning. 7 days, 4 times a day, all color-coded the way the hospice nurse had shown me. The coffee pot finished its cycle with a final sputter, and in the living room just beyond the doorway where I stood, my mother sat in her recliner near the window, wrapped in the blue afghan her own mother had crocheted 60 years ago. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. The oxygen concentrator hummed its mechanical rhythm beside her. She was alive, very, very alive. Her eyes found mine across the room, cloudy with cataracts but sharp with something else. Something Marcus hadn't seen in years, because he'd stopped really looking at her sometime around 2019, right after Dad's funeral, when the estate was settled and it became clear there wasn't enough money to fight over yet. Mom's hand, thin and spotted with age, gripped the armrest of her chair. Her fingers were trembling slightly, but not from weakness, from something closer to anticipation. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice a whisper that barely carried over the oxygen machine's hiss. I walked over to her, knelt beside the recliner the way I'd done hundreds of times over the past 2 years, and took her hand in mine. Her skin felt like tissue paper, but her grip was surprisingly firm. The television was muted on some afternoon judge show neither of us had been watching. Through the window behind her I could see Mrs. Patterson from next door pruning her roses, the yellow ones she'd planted after her husband died, the ones she talked to sometimes when she thought no one was listening. "He said you died last night," I told her gently. "Some kind of accident. He didn't specify. The funeral's tomorrow at Riverside Memorial, 1 o'clock. He's already arranged everything." Mom's eyes stayed on mine. She didn't blink, didn't gasp. She'd known this was coming, we both had, but hearing it confirmed seemed to settle something in her expression, something that had been waiting to be acknowledged. "And the inheritance?" she asked. "He says you left everything to him. Updated last month, apparently. Very official, very final." I paused, watching her process this. "He made sure I knew I'm getting nothing." A sound escaped her then. Not quite a laugh, but close. It rattled in her chest, got caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat, came out as something between a cough and a chuckle. I reached for the water bottle on the side table and helped her take a careful sip. Her medication schedule was strict: pain management, heart regulation, anti-anxiety. And we were only 2 hours past her afternoon dose. The hospice coordinator had called this morning to confirm our weekly check-in appointment for Thursday. Regular as clockwork, documenting every symptom, every decline, every step toward the end that Marcus had apparently decided to schedule on his own terms. "Good," Mom whispered after she'd swallowed. "That's good." She squeezed my hand 3 times. It was our signal, the one we'd developed during her worst nights when talking hurt too much. But she needed me to know she was still here, still present, still herself despite the morphine and the confusion and the way late-stage congestive heart failure was slowly drowning her from the inside. 3 squeezes meant, "I understand. I'm with you. Trust me." The thing is, I'd been documenting everything. Every conversation with Marcus where he talked over Mom like she wasn't in the room. Every visit from Jessica where she measured the windows for new curtains while Mom was still breathing under them. Every phone call with their lawyer, Martin Ashworth, a man I'd never met, but whose voice had that particular smoothness that comes from years of finding loopholes in elderly care regulations. Every forged signature on documents I'd photographed. Every medical decision made without consulting the actual patient. All of it. Saved, dated, backed up in 3 separate locations. But Mom had asked me to wait, to let them think they'd won, to let Marcus believe his carefully constructed narrative about her deteriorating mental state, the one he'd been building with selective doctor's visits and strategic paperwork since she'd moved in with me instead of him. She wanted to see how far he'd go, how completely he'd commit to erasing her while she was still alive enough to witness it. And now we knew. He'd go all the way to a fake funeral. "When do you want to tell him?" I asked, keeping my voice low, even though we were alone in the house. Even though Marcus was 45 minutes away in his McMansion in West Hartford, planning a memorial service for a woman who was listening to her own death announcement on speakerphone. Mom's eyes drifted to the window, to Mrs. Patterson's roses, to the October sky going purple at the edges. When she looked back at me, there were tears in the corners of her eyes, but they weren't sad tears. They were something else, something I'd seen in her expression more often lately. A kind of clarity that had nothing to do with cognitive function and everything to do with finally seeing people exactly as they were. "Not yet," she said. "Let him have his funeral first. Let him stand up there and cry his crocodile tears and accept condolences and play the grieving son. She paused, breathing carefully, each word requiring effort. Let him show everyone exactly who he is. Her hand squeezed mine again, 4 times this time, which wasn't one of our signals. 4 meant something new. "What's 4?" I asked. She smiled then, and it was the first real smile I'd seen on her face in months. Despite the pain, despite the oxygen tubes, despite everything Marcus had done and was about to do, she smiled like someone who'd just figured out the punchline to a very long, very cruel joke. "4 means he doesn't know about the envelope," she whispered. "The one in your desk drawer, the one you still haven't opened. 4 means he thinks he's already won." The oxygen machine hummed. Mrs. Patterson's pruning shears clicked in the distance. My mother's hand went still in mine, but her pulse beat steadily against my fingers. Alive, 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 while 45 minutes away, my brother planned her funeral. The first time I noticed my mother being erased, it was a Thursday in April, 3 years before that phone call from Marcus. She was still living in her own house then, the split-level ranch in Glastonbury where she'd raised us, where Dad's reading glasses still sat on the hallway table, even though he'd been gone 6 months. The magnolia tree he'd planted in the front yard was blooming late that year, heavy white flowers against a slate sky that threatened rain but never delivered. I'd stop by after work to help her with her medication schedule. Nothing major, just the usual blood pressure pills, the baby aspirin her cardiologist insisted on, the vitamin D supplement her primary care doctor had added. Mom was 73 then, sharp as ever, still driving herself to the grocery store and her book club meetings at the library every Tuesday, still herself in every way that mattered. But when I walked into her kitchen that afternoon, there was a man I'd never seen before sitting at her table. He was young, mid-30s maybe, wearing business casual clothes that looked expensive in that studied way meant to inspire trust, khakis with a crisp line down the front, a button-down shirt the color of safe, institutional blue. He had papers spread across Mom's kitchen table, the same table where she'd served us breakfast for 18 years, where Dad had read the newspaper every Sunday morning with his coffee going cold beside him. The stranger's laptop was open, displaying some kind of form with Mom's name at the top. "Eleanor," Mom said when she saw me, and there was something in her voice I couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe, or warning. "This is Kevin. He's from the elder care consulting agency Marcus hired." Marcus hadn't mentioned hiring anyone. Kevin stood up, extended his hand with that firm grip people practice in management seminars. His smile showed too many teeth. "Mrs. Hartwell was just telling me about her daily routine," he said, gesturing to a clipboard filled with notes in his neat, impersonal handwriting. "We're doing a comprehensive assessment of her independent living capabilities." The way he said independent living capabilities made it sound like a condition to be diagnosed, rather than a life she'd been successfully living for 7 decades. "Mom's doing fine," I said, not taking his hand. "She doesn't need an assessment." "Marcus feels differently," Kevin replied, his smile never wavering. "As her son and co-power of attorney, he has concerns about her safety living alone. The recent incident with the stove—" "What incident?" I turned to Mom. She looked down at her hands, fingers twisting together in that anxious gesture she'd developed since Dad died. "I left a pot on the burner last week. Marcus stopped by and found it. Nothing happened. I caught it before anything burned. But he's been worried." The way she said worried carried the weight of many conversations I hadn't been part of. Many lectures, probably. Many reminders that she was getting older, more forgetful, more of a liability. I could imagine Marcus's voice, that particular tone he'd perfected over the years, the one that sounded like concern, but felt like control. "How often does Marcus stop by?" I asked. Kevin consulted his clipboard. "Mr. Hartwell has been very attentive. Weekly visits minimum, often more. He's documented several concerning incidents over the past 4 months. He read from his notes like a prosecutor building a case. Missed medication doses, confusion about appointments, difficulty managing bills, all consistent with early-stage cognitive decline." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Mom, is this true? She wouldn't meet my eyes. I forgot to take my evening pills a few times, and I did mix up the date of my dentist appointment last month. But Eleanor, everyone forgets things sometimes. I'm 73, not senile. No one's saying senile, Kevin said smoothly. We're simply establishing a baseline for care planning purposes. Your mother's health and safety are the priority here. But they weren't talking to me. The daughter who'd been helping Mom organize her pills every Sunday, who'd driven her to every cardiology appointment since Dad's funeral, who'd spent countless evenings just sitting with her while she processed her grief. They were talking around me, through me, like I was optional furniture in my mother's life. That's when I noticed the document Kevin had positioned in front of Mom's right hand. A consent form, multiple pages, the signature line waiting at the bottom like an open mouth. Was she signing? I asked. Just authorization for the assessment, Kevin said. Standard procedure. It allows us to access her medical records, speak with her healthcare providers, ensure we have a complete picture. I reached for the papers. Kevin's hand moved to block me, then reconsidered. Professional courtesy, probably. Or maybe he knew refusing would look suspicious. I scanned the dense paragraphs of legal language, my heart beating faster as certain phrases jumped out. Irrevocable consent, designated family representative, medical decision-making authority. This isn't just an assessment authorization, I said. This gives Marcus legal authority to make her medical decisions. Only in consultation with Mrs. Hartwell, of course, Kevin said. It's a safeguard, in case she's unable to advocate for herself. I can advocate for myself just fine, Mom said. But her voice was small, uncertain, like she'd been convinced over weeks of Marcus's visits that maybe she couldn't. That maybe forgetting where she'd put her reading glasses or missing one blood pressure pill meant her entire mind was suspect. I looked at my mother. This woman who'd raised 2 children, taught elementary school for 35 years, managed a household budget through recessions and booms, nursed my father through his final illness with a strength that had awed me. And I saw what Marcus had seen, someone alone, grieving, occasionally forgetful in the normal ways that every person in their 70s is forgetful. Someone vulnerable to being reshaped into a narrative of decline. Mom, don't sign this, I said. Kevin's smile tightened. Miss Hartwell, I understand this is emotional, but your mother has the right to make her own decisions about her care planning. If you're going to interfere with that process, I'm not interfering, I'm asking questions. Marcus said you might react this way, Kevin said. And there it was. The real conversation they'd been having before I arrived. The one where I was painted as difficult, over-emotional, unable to see what was best for Mom because I was too close to the situation. He mentioned you've been in denial about your mother's declining condition. The rain that had been threatening all afternoon finally started. Soft drops against the kitchen window. Mom's magnolia tree swayed in the wind, white petals scattering across the lawn like confetti at a funeral. Inside, the 3 of us sat in a silence that felt like the beginning of something I didn't have words for yet. Mom picked up the pen. Mom, I started. It's fine, Eleanor, she said quietly. Marcus is just trying to help. He's worried. We both know I haven't been myself since your father died. But she had been herself. Sad, yes. Lonely, absolutely. Forgetful in small human ways. But herself, her core, her identity, her sharp mind and sharper sense of when someone was bullshitting her. That woman was sitting right here. I could see her in the way her jaw set when she said Marcus was trying to help, a phrase that tasted like medicine going down wrong. She signed her name at the bottom of each page. Her handwriting was steady, perfect. Each letter formed with the precision of a woman who'd taught cursive to 2nd graders for 3 decades. Kevin gathered the papers with satisfaction that looked almost like triumph. Perfect. We'll be in touch about the next steps. Mr. Hartwell wanted me to discuss residential options with you, but perhaps that's a conversation for another day. Residential options, care facilities, the careful language of being put somewhere. After Kevin left, I sat with Mom at that kitchen table while the rain picked up outside. Her hands were shaking. He's been coming every week, she said finally. Marcus. Sometimes Jessica comes too. They talk about the house being too big for me, about how hard it must be to maintain, about assisted living communities with activities and friends. She looked up at me, tears spilling over. Eleanor, I don't want to leave my home, but they make it sound like I'm being selfish, like I'm refusing to see reality. I took her hands in mine. You're not selfish, and you're not confused. But what if I am? What if they're right and I just can't see it? That was the poison of it. The insidious way doubt had been planted and watered and cultivated until it had roots in her sense of self. Making her question her own reality was the first step. I didn't know it then, but I would learn. People don't usually steal someone's life all at once. They do it gradually, document by document, until the person being erased starts to believe they never really existed at all. 3 weeks later, Mom's primary care doctor called to cancel her regular appointment. When I called back to reschedule, the receptionist said Marcus had informed them he'd be coordinating all of Mom's medical care going forward. He'd already scheduled appointments with a geriatric specialist I'd never heard of. That's when I knew this wasn't concern. It was something else, something methodical, something that had already been in motion long before I'd walked into that kitchen and found a stranger cataloging my mother's life in checkboxes and assessment forms. The envelope appeared on a Tuesday morning in June, 2 months after Kevin's assessment, and 3 weeks after Mom's new geriatric specialist declared her moderately impaired based on a 15-minute conversation and a questionnaire Marcus had filled out himself. I found Mom standing in her bedroom, holding a manila envelope that looked official and intimidating in the way that important documents always do. Thick paper, metal clasp, the weight of something that matters. Her hands were trembling, but not from the Parkinson's-like shakes the specialist had noted in her chart. These were different tremors, the kind that come from fear that's been living in your bones for so long it's become part of your skeleton. It came yesterday, she said without looking at me. Marcus brought it by. Said I needed to review it with his lawyer before the end of the month. The bedroom still smelled like Dad, Old Spice, and the particular mustiness of his wool cardigan that Mom hadn't been able to bring herself to wash or give away. His side of the closet remained exactly as he'd left it, shirts hanging with military precision, shoes lined up like soldiers awaiting orders that would never come. The morning light coming through the lace curtains Mom had made herself in 1987 cast patterns on the hardwood floor, shadows that looked like cell bars. What's in it? I asked, though part of me already knew. Part of me had been waiting for this exact moment since Kevin had shown up with his clipboard and his practiced smile. Mom handed me the envelope without opening it. Inside were documents from Ashworth and Associates, Martin Ashworth, the lawyer I'd heard about but never met. Legal papers with language so dense it took me 3 tries to understand what I was reading. Durable power of attorney, healthcare proxy, advance directive, all naming Marcus as primary decision maker, all drafted, printed, and ready for Mom's signature. And at the bottom of the stack, a new will. I read it twice, my pulse hammering in my throat. Mom's house, the one she and Dad had bought in 1978 for $65,000, the one she'd painted every room of at least 3 times, the one that held every major memory of our childhood, was to be transferred to Marcus immediately upon her death. Her savings account, modest but carefully maintained through 40 years of teacher's salary, her life insurance policy, Dad's pension survivor benefits, the antique jewelry she'd inherited from her own mother, pieces that were supposed to come to me, that she'd promised me, that we'd planned for together. Everything to Marcus, everything managed by Marcus, everything decided by Marcus. The document even specified funeral arrangements, Riverside Memorial, plot next to Dad, service to be simple and dignified, with details at the discretion of her son. When did he bring this? I asked, my voice coming out strangled. Around 4 yesterday. Jessica was with him. Mom sat down on the edge of the bed, the same bed she'd shared with Dad for 42 years. They stayed for an hour, explaining everything, how this would make things easier, how it would prevent fighting later. How it was what Dad would have wanted. Everything organized, nothing messy, no burden on anyone. The way she said burden broke something in my chest, like she'd internalized the idea that her continued existence was an inconvenience requiring management. They said you'd be upset, Mom continued, staring at her hands. Marcus said you'd try to talk me out of it because you're too emotional to see clearly, that you never got along with him and would use this as another excuse to cause problems. She looked up at me finally, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. Eleanor, is that true? Am I letting our old sibling rivalry cloud my judgment? I knelt in front of her, taking her hands the way I had 1,000 times since Dad died. Her wedding ring, thin gold, worn smooth after decades, caught the light. Dad had proposed with that ring in the parking lot of the Glastonbury diner after a shift at the paper mill, too impatient to wait for somewhere romantic. She'd told me that story at least 50 times, always with the same joy in her voice, the same wonder that someone had chosen her. Mom, when have Marcus and I ever had rivalry? We were fine growing up. We're fine now. Or we were before. I gestured at the envelope. This isn't about old grudges. This is about you being erased from your own life. But what if I am declining? Her voice cracked. What if I can't see it? Dr. Morrison spent 15 minutes with you. I've spent 3 evenings a week with you for the past year. You're grieving, you're lonely. You forget things sometimes because you're 73 years old and that's normal. But you're not incompetent. You're not impaired. You're being convinced that you are. She pulled her hands away, stood up, walked to the window where her bird feeder hung from the oak tree. A cardinal was perched there, bright red against green leaves, so vivid it looked painted. Dad had loved cardinals, said they were good luck. Mom watched it for a long moment. Marcus is my son, she said quietly. He's family. Why would he do this if it wasn't really to help me? That was the question I'd been avoiding. The answer I didn't want to speak out loud because once you say certain things, you can't unsay them. Once you name what's happening, you have to decide what you're going to do about it. Mom, turn around and look at me. She did, slowly, her reflection in the window, overlapping with her real face, so there seemed to be 2 of her. The solid woman standing in her bedroom, and the ghost trapped in the glass. Tell me the truth, I said. Not what Marcus told you to think. Not what the doctors wrote in their reports. What do you actually want? Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. When the words finally came, they were barely audible over the air conditioner's hum. I want to stay in my house. I want to make my own decisions. I want to see my granddaughter graduate high school next year. I want to plant tomatoes in the garden this summer, even if I forget to water them sometimes. I want to read mysteries at night and fall asleep with my book open and wake up not knowing what page I was on. I want to be forgetful and slow and sad and alive in my own messy, imperfect way. Tears were streaming down her face now. But Eleanor, I'm so tired of fighting. I'm so tired of Marcus making me feel like I'm being difficult, like I'm the problem. Maybe it would be easier to just let him handle everything, sign the papers, and stop making trouble. The cardinal flew away, a flash of red disappearing into the trees. The bird feeder swayed empty in the breeze. I thought about calling Marcus right then, confronting him, making a scene, getting lawyers involved, documenting everything. The coerced signatures, the manipulated medical assessments, the systematic isolation of a grieving woman from her own autonomy. I could fight this. I had evidence. I had witnesses. I had the truth. But I also had my mother, standing in front of me with tears on her face and exhaustion in every line of her body. And I knew that fighting would mean months of legal battles, family warfare, stress that her weakening heart might not survive. It would mean Marcus painting her as incompetent in court. More doctors, more assessments, more strangers deciding whether her forgetfulness was normal aging or evidence of decline requiring intervention. It would mean stealing whatever time she had left and filling it with conflict instead of peace. Don't sign it yet, I said finally. Eleanor, just give me 2 weeks. Keep the envelope. Tell Marcus you're reviewing it with your own lawyer if he asks. But don't sign anything yet. Why? What are you going to do? Honestly, I didn't know. But I remembered something Dad had said during his last hospitalization, when the cancer had spread and the doctors were pushing aggressive treatments that would buy weeks at the cost of quality. He'd pulled me aside and said, "Sometimes the right choice isn't the obvious one. Sometimes you have to let people think they're winning so you can figure out how to actually win." At the time, I thought he meant accepting his death with grace instead of fighting it tooth and nail. But maybe he'd meant something bigger, something about choosing your battles, about appearing to surrender while actually regrouping. "I'm going to think," I told Mom, "and you're going to sit with what you actually want, not what Marcus says you should want. 2 weeks, then we'll decide together." She nodded, but I could see the doubt still living in her eyes. Marcus had planted it deep, watered it with his concerned visits and his helpful suggestions, and his documentation of every normal moment of aging as evidence of incompetence. That doubt had roots now, strong ones. What I didn't tell her, what I couldn't tell her yet, was that I'd already started my own documentation. Every conversation with Marcus, recorded with my phone in my pocket when he came to check on Mom. Every medical bill showing appointments she'd supposedly missed but had actually been canceled by Marcus. Every change to her medical records that didn't match reality. I'd been collecting evidence not because I'd planned to use it, but because some instinct had told me to preserve the truth before it could be rewritten. The envelope sat on Mom's dresser for the rest of the afternoon, an unopened threat. Neither of us touched it. Neither of us wanted to acknowledge what it represented, the moment we'd have to choose between fighting back and letting Marcus have his way. But here's what I learned that day. Sometimes the most powerful decision isn't action. It's strategic silence. It's letting your enemy think they've already won while you figure out how to make them lose in ways they never see coming. 2 weeks later, when Marcus called to ask about the papers, Mom told him she'd signed them and given them to his lawyer. She hadn't, of course. The envelope stayed sealed on her dresser, untouched. That was the first lie we told together. It wouldn't be the last. Thanksgiving arrived with the kind of cold that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. Marcus insisted on hosting at his house in West Hartford, the 4-bedroom colonial with the professionally landscaped yard, and the kitchen that had been featured in some home design magazine Jessica wouldn't stop mentioning. Mom and I drove up together in my Toyota, the heat blasting but never quite warming us, her hands folded in her lap over a Tupperware container of her famous cranberry sauce that Jessica had specifically requested but would definitely not serve. "Remember," Mom said as we pulled into their circular driveway, past the fountain that had cost more than my annual salary, "we don't know anything about the papers. As far as Marcus knows, everything's signed and filed with Martin Ashworth. We're just here for dinner." Her voice was steady, but I could see her pulse jumping in her throat. 3 months had passed since she'd lied to Marcus about signing those documents. 3 months of him calling weekly to check on her. His tone always pleasant, always concerned, always carrying that underlying current of someone monitoring an asset. 3 months of Jessica stopping by unexpectedly to measure windows or check on things while Mom was supposedly at the grocery store. 3 months of playing along with the fiction that Mom was declining, when really she was just scared. The front door opened before we could knock. Jessica stood there in a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost what Mom spent on groceries for a month, her smile bright and empty as a showroom display. "Catherine, Eleanor, come in, come in. Oh, you brought cranberry sauce, how sweet." She took the Tupperware from Mom with fingertips that barely touched it, like it might contaminate her manicure. "I'll just put this in the kitchen. We're having the most amazing cranberry chutney from this boutique place in Simsbury, but it's so thoughtful of you to bring something." Translation: "Your food isn't good enough for my table, but I'll pretend to appreciate the gesture." Inside, the house smelled like catered Thanksgiving, expensive and impersonal, like celebration purchased by the pound. The dining room table was set with china I didn't recognize, probably new, probably worth more than my car. Everything matched, everything gleamed, everything felt like a stage set for a family that didn't actually exist. Marcus appeared from his home office, phone still pressed to his ear, finger raised in that universal gesture of just one more minute that always meant 10. He'd put on weight since Dad's funeral, the kind that comes from too many business lunches and not enough worry. His hairline was receding, but he'd grown it longer on top to compensate, styled with product that made it look wet. When he finally ended his call, he crossed to Mom and kissed her cheek with the perfunctory affection of someone completing a checklist item. "Mom, you look well. How are you feeling? Taking your medications regularly? Eleanor making sure you're staying on schedule?" Every question was an assessment disguised as care. Every inquiry a way of cataloging her status for future reference. I watched Mom's shoulders tense under her good cardigan, the navy blue one she'd bought for Dad's retirement party, back when retirement had seemed like the beginning of something, instead of a countdown to his death. "I'm fine, Marcus. Eleanor takes excellent care of me." That's what I like to hear. He turned to me with that smile he'd perfected in his 20s, the one that looked genuine but never reached his eyes. "Eleanor, good to see you. How's work?" "Good," I lied. I'd actually been working reduced hours to spend more time with Mom, but he didn't need to know that. Didn't need more ammunition for his narrative about me being financially unstable, emotionally overwrought, unable to think clearly about what was best for our mother. We moved into the living room where their daughter Melissa sat scrolling through her phone, 17 years old and already fluent in the language of polite disinterest. She looked up long enough to say, "Hey, Grandma," before returning to her screen. I couldn't blame her. These family gatherings had become performances, and she'd learned early not to get too invested in the script. "So, Mom," Marcus said, settling into his leather recliner with a craft beer that probably had a story about local hops and small batch brewing, "Jessica and I were thinking, that house of yours in Glastonbury, it's a lot for you to maintain. The lawn care, the snow removal, the general upkeep. We've been looking at some really excellent assisted living communities. Beautiful places, not like the old nursing homes, more like retirement resorts." Here we go, I thought. The sales pitch, the carefully rehearsed conversation, designed to sound spontaneous. "I'm not interested in moving," Mom said quietly. I know. Marcus's voice took on that patient tone people use with children who don't understand what's good for them. "But hear me out. These places have activities, social opportunities, full-time medical staff. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. No cooking, no cleaning, no maintenance. Just enjoy your golden years." "I enjoy my golden years in my own home," Mom said, a little sharper now. Jessica appeared from the kitchen with a tray of appetizers arranged like a magazine spread. "Catherine, we're just worried about you being alone in that big house. What if something happens? What if you fall and can't reach the phone? At my age, I'd want someone checking on me regularly. It's about safety." The thing about Jessica was that she believed her own performance. She genuinely thought she was being helpful, advocating for Mom's well-being, doing the difficult but necessary work of convincing an elderly woman to accept reality. She'd convinced herself that wanting Mom's house had nothing to do with the real estate market in Glastonbury, or the fact that they could sell it and pocket a profit that would fund Melissa's college tuition and then some. "I have Eleanor checking on me," Mom said. "Eleanor has her own life," Marcus interjected smoothly. "Her own job, her own responsibilities. It's not fair to burden her with constant caretaking, especially when there are professionals who could do it better." There it was, the subtle knife, the suggestion that I was inadequate, that my care was amateur hour compared to what money could buy. Never mind that I knew Mom's medication schedule by heart, knew her favorite comfort foods, knew how to talk her through the panic attacks that sometimes hit at 3 in the morning when grief ambushed her in the dark. Never mind that she felt safe with me in ways she'd never feel safe with strangers, in matching scrubs calling her dear, in voices trained to soothe without actually connecting. "I appreciate your concern," Mom said, and I heard the tremor underneath her words. "But I'm not ready to make any changes right now." Marcus exchanged a look with Jessica, the kind of look that said, "See, this is what we're dealing with. Unreasonable, stubborn, unwilling to accept help even when it's clearly needed." "Well," Jessica said brightly, "let's talk about it more after dinner. I'm sure once Catherine hears about some of these places, she'll feel differently. I actually brought brochures. Of course she had. This whole dinner was an intervention disguised as a holiday. They'd probably practiced their talking points, divided up their arguments, planned the whole thing like a business presentation, which, in a sense, it was. The business of convincing Mom to sign over her life while calling it care. Dinner was excruciating. Every conversation circled back to Mom's supposed fragility. Remember when she forgot to lock her door last month? Remember when she missed her dentist appointment? Remember when she seemed confused about what day it was? Each anecdote presented as evidence. Each small human error inflated into proof of decline. I watched Mom shrink with each story. Saw her second-guess herself with every sympathetic noise Jessica made. Marcus was good at this, making concern feel like love, making control feel like protection. And Jessica was the perfect partner. All warm support and practical suggestions that just happened to align exactly with what Marcus wanted. "The brochures are in my office," Marcus said as Jessica cleared the plates. "Mom, why don't you come take a look? Some of these places have wait lists. If you're interested, we'd need to get you on them soon." "I'll come too," I said, standing. "Actually, Eleanor, could you help me with the dishes?" Jessica's hand was already on my arm, gentle but firm. "I'd love to hear how your mother's really doing, sister to sister." We weren't sisters. We were barely friends. But refusing would cause a scene, and causing a scene would give them exactly what they wanted. More evidence that I was difficult, emotional, the problem child making everything harder than it needed to be. So I went to the kitchen while Marcus led Mom to his office. And I listened to Jessica talk about her boutique fitness classes and her daughter's college applications, and how hard it was to find good help these days. I listened and smiled and washed dishes in her Undermount farmhouse sink, while in another room, my brother showed our mother glossy photographs of assisted living facilities with names like Sunrise Manor and Golden Horizons, places designed to sound like destinations instead of exits. When we finally left 3 hours later, Mom cried in the car. Not loud sobs, just silent tears sliding down her face while I drove too fast through the dark November streets. She held those brochures in her lap like they were contaminated. "He's going to keep pushing," she said finally. "He thinks I'm being stubborn, unreasonable. He actually said I'm making this harder on everyone by refusing help I clearly need." "You don't need help. You need to be left alone." "But what if he's right, Eleanor? What if I am being selfish? What if something does happen and I'm alone and—" "Mom," I pulled over into a CVS parking lot, put the car in park, turned to face her. "Listen to me. This isn't about your safety. It's about control, and probably money. That house is worth $400,000. Your savings, Dad's pension, your life insurance, it all adds up. This is about Marcus positioning himself to manage your assets." She looked at me with something like hope dying in her eyes. "He wouldn't. He's my son." "He already has. Those papers he wanted you to sign, they give him everything. And now he's trying to convince you that you're incompetent enough to need to sign them." We sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes, the car running, the heat blasting, while Mom processed what I was telling her. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, harder. "He scheduled a funeral," she said, "at dinner while you were in the kitchen. He mentioned wanting to pre-plan. Said it would be easier on everyone if details were handled in advance. Said he'd already talked to Riverside Memorial about plots and services. Said he had it all arranged." My blood went cold. "He what?" "He scheduled my funeral, Eleanor." While I sat there breathing, that's when we both knew. This wasn't just about money or control or convenience. This was about Marcus having decided that his mother's life was already over, that her continued existence was just an inconvenient delay before he could get on with his plans. He wasn't waiting for her to die. He was actively arranging the world as if she already had. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in January, forwarded from Mom's address in Glastonbury to my apartment in Hartford, where she'd been living with me for 3 weeks. 3 weeks since she'd finally agreed to leave her house temporarily after Marcus had called Adult Protective Services claiming she'd been found wandering confused in her neighborhood at midnight. It was a lie. She'd been walking her neighbor's dog because the neighbor had the flu. But the report was filed, the case opened, and suddenly there were social workers involved asking questions about her competency. So she'd moved in with me. Temporarily, we told Marcus. Just until the APS investigation concluded. Just until things settled down. The envelope was from Blue Cross Blue Shield. I almost threw it away with the rest of the junk mail. Credit card offers, grocery store circulars, coupons for oil changes. But something about the weight of it made me open it instead. Insurance denial letter, standard format, patient name, Catherine Ann Hartwell, date of birth, March 15, 1950. Reason for denial, patient deceased as of November 8, 2022. I read it 3 times before the words rearranged themselves into meaning. Mom was in the kitchen making tea, moving slowly but steadily, humming something that might have been a hymn from her childhood church. Very much alive, very much breathing, very much not deceased, as of November 8, 2022, which was, I realized with ice forming in my stomach, exactly 2 weeks after Thanksgiving dinner. "Mom," I called out, my voice strange in my own ears. "Can you come here?" She appeared in the doorway of my bedroom, reading glasses perched on her nose, a dish towel in her hands. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Apparently I'm living with one." I handed her the letter. I watched her face change as she read. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something darker. A kind of understanding that looked like resignation and fury having a collision inside her chest. Her hands started shaking so badly the paper rattled. I took it from her before she dropped it. "How?" she whispered. "How can I be dead?" That was the question that launched us into 3 days of detective work that felt like falling down a rabbit hole into a nightmare version of bureaucracy. Every phone call revealed another piece of the systematic erasure Marcus had orchestrated. First was the insurance company. I spent 2 hours on hold, transferred between departments, explaining over and over that my mother was not deceased, that this was an error, that someone needed to fix this immediately. Finally, I reached a supervisor named Patricia, who spoke in that careful voice people use when they think you might be unstable. "Ma'am, according to our records, we received notification of Mrs. Hartwell's death from her primary physician, Dr. Robert Morrison, on November 10th, 2022. The death certificate was filed with the state of Connecticut. All accounts have been closed accordingly. If you believe this is an error, you'll need to contact the physician's office directly. Dr. Morrison, the geriatric specialist Marcus had found, the one who diagnosed Mom with moderate cognitive impairment after 15 minutes. I called his office. The receptionist put me through to a nurse, who put me through to an office manager, who finally explained in a tone of bureaucratic patience that they had documentation showing Mrs. Hartwell had passed away peacefully at Riverside Hospice Care on November 8, 2022, at approximately 3:17 p.m. Next of kin, her son Marcus, had been present. Death was attributed to congestive heart failure and complications from advanced dementia. "But she doesn't have advanced dementia," I said, watching Mom sitting on my couch, alive, lucid, crying silent tears. "She's sitting right here. She's alive. Ma'am, I'm looking at the death certificate right now, signed by Dr. Morrison, filed with the state. I understand this is emotional, but can you send me a copy?" There was a pause. "Of the death certificate? I'm not sure that's... I need to see what you're looking at. Please, I'll give you my email." She did, reluctantly, and 10 minutes later, I was staring at an official state of Connecticut death certificate for Catherine Ann Hartwell. Date of death, November 8, 2022. Place of death, Riverside Hospice Care Center, Hartford, Connecticut. Cause of death, congestive heart failure, dementia. Informant, Marcus Hartwell. Son, physician, Dr. Robert Morrison, MD. Everything official, everything legal, everything completely impossibly false. Mom had never been to Riverside Hospice. She'd never even been admitted. But according to this document, she died there peacefully, with her loving son at her side. "He killed me on paper," Mom said, staring at the document I'd printed out. Her voice was hollow, scraped clean of emotion. While I was alive and breathing, he signed a death certificate. We spent the rest of that day making calls. Social Security had been notified. They'd already stopped her benefit payments. The pension administrator had closed Dad's survivor benefit account. Her bank had frozen her accounts pending estate processing. Her credit cards had been cancelled. Her driver's license had been flagged as invalid. Even her voter registration had been purged. Every system, every database, every official record now listed Catherine Ann Hartwell as deceased. How is this legal? I asked, phone pressed to my ear while I waited on hold with the Connecticut Department of Vital Records. How can someone just file a fake death certificate? They can't, said the woman at Vital Records when she finally picked up. Death certificates require physician signatures, funeral home documentation, burial permits. There are checks and balances. If your mother is alive, then someone committed fraud. Significant fraud. You need to file a police report. The Hartford Police Department was less helpful. The officer who took my report, a tired-looking man named Kowalski, who'd probably seen every variety of family drama, listened with increasing skepticism as I explained that my brother had filed a fraudulent death certificate for our living mother. "So your mother's here?" he asked. "I can see her? Verify she's alive?" "She's in the car. She didn't want to come in. This is traumatic for her." He looked at me with the expression of someone who's dealt with too many cases of elder abuse, family disputes over money, and adult children with varying degrees of mental stability fighting over inheritance. "Ma'am, what you're describing is a serious crime. Multiple felonies. Are you sure you want to file this report? Because if we investigate and find out this is a misunderstanding..." "A misunderstanding? She's legally dead while sitting in my parking lot eating a tuna sandwich." But I could see it in his eyes. The doubt, the calculation. This sounded crazy. It sounded like the kind of thing a disturbed person would make up. It sounded probably exactly like what Marcus would have predicted I'd do. Make wild accusations, cause scenes, prove I was the unstable one who couldn't be trusted with Mom's care. I didn't file the report. Not then. Because I realized that going through official channels would mean investigations, hearings, evaluations. It would mean Mom being examined by doctors who would write reports that Marcus's lawyer could use. It would mean months of legal limbo where she was legally dead but physically alive, trapped in bureaucratic purgatory while Marcus's attorneys argued about competency and standing and whether a dead woman could contest her own death. Instead, I gathered evidence, took Mom to her actual primary care physician, the one she'd been seeing for 15 years before Marcus had switched her to Dr. Morrison, and got a signed letter confirming she was alive and in reasonable health. Went to the DMV and got them to photograph her holding her supposedly invalid driver's license next to that day's newspaper. Collected bank statements showing Marcus had already started accessing her accounts. Found emails between him and Jessica discussing the house sale, dated before Mom's supposed death date, proving premeditation. But the worst discovery came last. I called Riverside Hospice pretending to be handling final affairs for Mom's estate. The administrator I spoke to had no record of Catherine Hartwell ever being admitted, no record of her dying there, no record of any interaction with Dr. Morrison or Marcus Hartwell regarding her care. "I'm confused," the woman said. "Why would you think your mother passed away here?" "Because her death certificate says she did." Long pause. "Ma'am, that's not possible. We keep meticulous records. If someone died in our facility, we'd know. We'd have documentation. This sounds like, I'm sorry to say this, but it sounds like fraud." So Marcus hadn't even bothered to set up a fake hospice admission. He'd just written Riverside Hospice on the death certificate, probably assuming no one would ever check. Why would they? Dead people don't call to verify the details of their own deaths. That night, Mom and I sat in my living room with all the evidence spread across my coffee table, like pieces of a puzzle that formed a picture neither of us wanted to see. Documents proving she was dead. Documents proving she was alive. Her entire existence reduced to competing paperwork. "What do we do?" she asked. Eleanor, how do we fight this? I thought about Kowalski's skepticism, about the legal system that would require Mom to prove her competency, while Marcos's lawyers argued she was too impaired to understand her own situation, about the months or years of court battles while she grew older, weaker, more vulnerable to the very decline they were falsely claiming she already had. We let him think he won, I said finally. We let him believe you're dead. What? Think about it. He filed this death certificate. He's probably already celebrating, already making plans for the house and the money. Let him. Let him get comfortable. Let him start acting like you're really gone. And while he does that, we document everything. We gather evidence. We wait until he makes a mistake big enough that he can't talk his way out of it. Mom looked at me like I'd suggested something insane, which, maybe, I had. But what was the alternative? Go to court as a dead woman fighting to prove she's alive? Face down Marcus's lawyers and doctors and carefully constructed narrative while she was legally non-existent? I'm scared, she said quietly. Me too. But Mom, you've been scared for 2 years. Scared he was right about you declining. Scared you were becoming a burden. Scared you were losing yourself. I took her hands. You're not. You're here. You're real. And we are going to prove it. But on our terms, not his. She squeezed my hands 3 times. Our signal, understanding, agreement, trust. The next day, Marcus called Mom's old number. I'd been forwarding her calls to my phone. When I answered, he sounded almost cheerful. Eleanor, I've been meaning to talk to you. I know Mom's been staying with you, but Jessica and I really think it's time we looked at proper care facilities. This situation isn't sustainable. Actually, Marcus, I think you're right. Silence. He hadn't expected agreement. You do? Mom needs more help than I can provide. I was thinking maybe we should look at those places you mentioned. Could you send me the information? I could hear the smile in his voice. Of course. I'll have Jessica put together a packet. This is really good, Eleanor. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. Reasonable. That's what he wanted. Reasonable, compliant, defeated. After I hung up, Mom looked at me with something like pride mixed with horror. You're getting good at lying. I learned from watching him, I said. The phone call that started this whole story, the one where Marcus told me Mom was dead and I smiled, happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October, almost 2 years after he'd filed that fraudulent death certificate. 2 years of Mom living with me in secret. 2 years of her being officially dead while grocery shopping, watching her favorite cooking shows, calling her sister in Florida every Sunday. 2 years of me telling Marcus she'd finally agreed to move into Sunrise Manor, that assisted living facility Jessica had been pushing. 2 years of fabricating updates about her adjustment and her new friends and her acceptance of her situation. Marcus never visited, not once. Jessica sent a fruit basket at Christmas to Sunrise Manor's address, which I had to intercept before they returned it as undeliverable to a resident who didn't exist. They were satisfied with phone updates, with my reports that Mom was doing as well as could be expected and finally getting the professional care she needs. They were satisfied because they'd already gotten what they wanted. Mom's house in Glastonbury sold 6 months after her legal death for $435,000. Marcus handled everything as executor of her estate, an estate that couldn't be contested because the person it belonged to was officially deceased. Her bank accounts closed and transferred. Dad's pension benefits redirected to Marcus as next of kin. Even her jewelry, Grandma's pearls, the sapphire ring Dad had given her on their 25th anniversary, all of it packed up and distributed according to the will Marcus had drafted and Mom had never signed. The only thing he didn't have was the envelope, the one Mom had given me 2 years ago with instructions not to open it until she told me to. The one that sat in my desk drawer, sealed, waiting. So when my phone rang that Tuesday afternoon and Marcus's name appeared on the screen, I almost didn't answer. Mom was sitting beside me on the couch, doing a crossword puzzle, the oxygen concentrator humming its familiar rhythm. Her congestive heart failure had worsened over the past 6 months. Real decline this time, not Marcus's fabricated version. The hospice nurse came twice a week now. We both knew the end was approaching, the real end. I put the phone on speaker so Mom could hear. "Eleanor?" Marcus said, his voice tight with something I couldn't quite identify. Stress, maybe, or fear disguised as authority. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Okay," I said carefully. "Have you been to Mom's grave recently?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Mom's eyes found mine, wide with sudden understanding. "Why would I go to her grave?" I asked. "Because someone has been. Someone's been leaving flowers, fresh ones, every week for months now. And the cemetery finally told me after I complained. They said a woman matching your description has been coming regularly. I hadn't been to the grave. There was no grave, just an empty plot Marcus had purchased next to Dad's real one, with a headstone he'd erected bearing Mom's name and her fraudulent death date, a memorial to a woman who was still breathing. But someone had been visiting. Someone had been leaving flowers. "Marcus, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't been to any cemetery." "Then who—" He stopped. I could hear him breathing, thinking, recalibrating. "Eleanor, is there something you need to tell me? About Mom?" This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. The crack in his certainty. The first hint of doubt creeping into his carefully constructed narrative. He'd gotten away with it for 2 years. The fake death certificate, the stolen inheritance, the erasure of our mother while she still lived. But now something was wrong. Someone was disrupting his story. "What would I need to tell you?" I asked, my voice steady, that smile starting to form on my lips the way it had been forming for 2 years every time he called, every time he asked about the mother he thought was dead and I knew was alive. "Nothing. Never mind. There's been some confusion. I'll handle it." But he didn't sound like someone who could handle it. He sounded like someone whose foundation was cracking. After he hung up, Mom set down her crossword puzzle. "Who's been visiting the grave?" "I don't know, but I think I need to find out." I drove to Riverside Memorial the next morning. It was one of those perfect October days that make you understand why people write poetry about New England autumns. Crisp air, leaves turning gold and crimson, that particular quality of light that makes everything look like it's being painted in real time. Dad's grave was easy to find. 3rd row from the oak tree, his simple granite marker stating his name and dates and nothing else because he'd hated fuss. Next to him was the marker Marcus had placed for Mom. Catherine Ann Hartwell, beloved mother and wife, March 15, 1950, November 8, 2022. Rest in peace. And on the grave of a woman who was still alive, sat a fresh bouquet of white roses. I was standing there staring at those flowers when I heard footsteps behind me. I thought it might be you eventually. I turned to find an elderly woman, maybe 80, with steel gray hair and eyes that held the particular sharpness of someone who'd seen enough of life's ugliness to recognize it immediately. She was holding a watering can and wearing gardening gloves. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "No, but I know your mother, Catherine Hartwell. We were in the same book club for 15 years before she disappeared." The woman smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "I'm Marcia Chen. I live 3 houses down from where Catherine used to live in Glastonbury, and I've been leaving flowers on this grave for 6 months because something about it never sat right with me." My heart was pounding. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I saw your mother 3 weeks before this headstone says she died. She was perfectly lucid, perfectly healthy, walking my son's dog because he had the flu, and then suddenly she was gone. House empty, no forwarding address, family saying she'd passed away peacefully. But there was no obituary, no funeral announcement, nothing in the local paper." Martha crossed her arms. "And your brother sold our house so fast it made my head spin. So I started asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind you ask when you've been a family law attorney for 40 years, and you recognize elder abuse when you see it." She pulled off her gardening gloves, looking at me with the expression of someone making a calculation. "I called Riverside Hospice. They have no record of Catherine ever being there. I called her actual doctor, the one she'd been seeing for years, and he said she'd been transferred to a specialist he'd never heard of and never referred her to. I requested a copy of the death certificate through a colleague. Very official looking, Also, very suspicious. Why suspicious? Because I'd seen Catherine alive after the date it says she died, which means either I saw a ghost walking a golden retriever or someone filed false documentation. Martha stepped closer. So I've been leaving flowers and waiting because I figured eventually either you'd show up or your brother would, and I'd get my answer about which one of you killed Catherine on paper. The words hung between us, sharp as knives. This woman, this stranger who owed us nothing, had been conducting her own investigation for months, documenting, questioning, refusing to accept Marcus's narrative. She's alive, I said quietly. My mother is alive. She's been living with me for 2 years. Martha didn't look surprised. She looked vindicated. I thought so. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know. I've been gathering evidence, but you're scared that fighting it will stress her to death before you can prove she's alive. Martha nodded. That's what he's counting on. That's why elder abuse is so effective. By the time the victim is ready to fight, they're often too weak to survive the battle. So what do? Martha reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a business card. Martha Chen, attorney at law, family, and elder law specialist, retired. Her cell phone number was written on the back in neat handwriting. You let me help you pro bono, because your mother was kind to me when my husband died, and because I'm too old and too angry to watch someone get away with this. She paused, looking at the headstone with disgust. Also because I really, really want to see your brother's face when your mother walks into that courtroom. I took the card, my hands shaking. He has lawyers, expensive ones. I know. Martin Ashworth. I've opposed him in court 6 times. He's very good at making theft look like protection, but he's never dealt with a plaintiff who's literally returned from the dead. Martha smiled, and this time it was genuine. Call me when you're ready, or when she's ready, or when you're both angry enough to stop hiding and start fighting. That night, I told Mom about Martha, about the flowers, about the offer of help. We sat in my living room with the envelope still unopened in my desk drawer, and I asked her the question I'd been avoiding for 2 years. What's in the envelope, Mom? Why won't you let me open it? She was quiet for a long moment. Her breathing labored, her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear. Insurance, she said. Against the day when I'm really gone, and you need proof of what he did. Against the possibility that I die before we can fight this, and you're left with nothing but accusations. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, and maybe against my own fear. As long as that envelope stays sealed, we still have options. We can still choose. Once you open it, once you know what's inside, we're committed to whatever comes next. What comes next is justice. What comes next, Mom corrected gently, is war. She was right, of course. Opening that envelope would mean choosing battle over peace. It would mean exposing Marcus, destroying what was left of our family, spending her final months in courtrooms instead of quiet evenings. It would mean making her death, her real death when it came, into a weapon. But it would also mean she'd die as herself, Catherine Ann Hartwell, alive, real, not erased. I'm ready, she said, squeezing my hand 4 times. I'm ready to be alive again. Mom died on a Wednesday morning in March, 4 months after she'd told me she was ready to fight. 4 months of Martha Chen building a case so airtight that even Martin Ashworth couldn't dismantle it. 4 months of depositions scheduled and evidence catalogued and witnesses interviewed. 4 months of Mom getting weaker, her heart failing in ways that no amount of anger or justice could reverse. She died in my guest bedroom with spring sunlight coming through the curtains she'd helped me pick out at Target 3 years earlier. The hospice nurse was there, a kind woman named Patricia, who'd been coming daily for 2 weeks. I was holding Mom's hand. Her breathing had been getting shallower all morning, each exhale taking longer to follow each inhale, until finally one breath just didn't come, and the silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. I'm sorry, Patricia said softly, checking for a pulse she knew she wouldn't find. She's gone. But this time, it was real. This time, The death certificate Patricia would file would be accurate. Catherine Ann Hartwell, March 15th, 1950, March 23rd, 2025. Cause of death, congestive heart failure. Place of death, 247. Asylum Avenue, Hartford, Connecticut. My apartment. Her home. I called Marcia first. Then I called the funeral home Mom and I had selected together. Not Riverside Memorial, where Marcus had planned her fake funeral, but a small family place in Hartford that had handled Dad's service years before. And then, because it was required, because I had to, I called Marcus. He answered on the third ring. Eleanor, is everything okay? The question was automatic, meaningless. He hadn't asked if I was okay in years, not really. This was just the sound people make when their phone rings unexpectedly on a Wednesday afternoon. Mom died this morning, I said, and I kept my voice flat, empty, because anything else would have revealed too much. There was a pause, a long one. I could almost hear his brain working, trying to figure out what I meant. Mom had died 2.5 years ago, according to him. She'd been at Sunrise Manor, supposedly, slowly declining in professional care while he got on with his life. What do you mean she died? I thought she was at the facility. She was here, with me. She's been here the whole time. I took a breath, and now she's dead. Actually dead. The hospice nurse is filling out the real death certificate right now. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Eleanor, what are you saying? I'm saying Mom never went to Sunrise Manor. She lived with me, and this morning her heart gave out, and she died in my guest bedroom. There will be a funeral on Saturday at Mueller Family Home on Farmington Avenue. 2 o'clock. You're welcome to attend, though I can't imagine why you'd want to. This isn't funny. No, I agreed. It really isn't. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking. Mom's body was still warm under my palm. Patricia was making phone calls, handling the logistics of death with practiced efficiency. And I was sitting there thinking about how Marcus was probably panicking right now, probably calling Martin Ashworth, probably trying to figure out how someone who'd been legally dead for 2.5 years could die again. The funeral home came for Mom's body an hour later. They were gentle, respectful, treating her with the dignity she deserved. After they left, my apartment felt impossibly empty. The oxygen concentrator was silent for the first time in months. The hospital bed the hospice had provided sat stripped and sterile. All the pill bottles, the medical supplies, the careful documentation of decline, all of it suddenly purposeless. Martha arrived that evening with Thai food and a bottle of wine neither of us would drink. I'm sorry, she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lavender and old books. I know you were ready for this, but that doesn't make it easier. She held on long enough, I said. Long enough to give her deposition. Long enough to sign the affidavits. Long enough to make sure Marcus couldn't claim she was incompetent when she said what he did to her. She was remarkable. That deposition, Martha shook her head. I've been practicing law for 45 years, and I've never seen anything like it. 3 hours of testimony, lucid and clear, explaining exactly how her son had erased her while she was still breathing. The judge cried. I saw him wipe his eyes when we played it back. We'd recorded everything. Mom's testimony about the fake death certificate, the stolen inheritance, the systematic isolation. Martha had brought in a forensic accountant who'd traced every dollar Marcus had taken. We had affidavits from Mom's actual doctor, from Patricia the hospice nurse, from neighbors in Glastonbury who'd seen Mom alive after her supposed death date. We had copies of the fraudulent documents Marcus had filed. We had everything except Mom, alive to see justice done. The funeral, I said. Will he come? Oh, he'll come, Martha said with certainty. He has to. If he doesn't show up, it looks suspicious. If he does show up, we have him on camera attending the funeral of someone he's already claimed died years ago. Either way, he loses. Saturday arrived with rain, the cold spring rain that feels more like winter refusing to die than genuine weather. The funeral home was small, intimate, with maybe 30 people in attendance. Mom's sister had flown in from Florida. Her book club friends came. Martha was there, of course. sitting in the back with a tablet recording everything. Patricia, the hospice nurse, came. Even Mrs. Patterson from Mom's old neighborhood showed up with a casserole and tears in her eyes. And Marcus came. He arrived 15 minutes late with Jessica, both of them dressed in expensive black that looked more like a business meeting than a funeral. I watched him walk down the aisle, saw him look at the casket, closed because Mom had requested privacy even in death, and saw the exact moment confusion became comprehension, became fear. He knew. He finally understood what was happening. Jessica looked confused, whispering something to him that he waved away impatiently. They sat 3 rows back. I could feel his eyes on me throughout the service, burning with questions he couldn't ask in front of all these witnesses. I kept the eulogy short. Talked about Mom's years as a teacher, her love of mystery novels, the way she'd made Dad's last days bearable with her strength. I talked about her courage in the face of betrayal. I didn't mention Marcus by name. I didn't have to. My mother spent the last years of her life being erased, I said, my voice steady despite the tears on my face. Someone decided she didn't matter anymore, that her existence was an inconvenience, that her death could be arranged on paper before her heart stopped beating. I looked directly at Marcus. But she mattered. She was real. She was here. And she made sure the truth would survive her. The service ended. People filed past the casket, leaving flowers, whispering condolences. Marcus and Jessica didn't approach me. They stood near the back, talking in urgent whispers, until finally Jessica left, and Marcus walked over. "Eleanor, we need to talk." "No, we don't. You can't possibly think you're going to get away with this. Whatever you're planning..." "I'm not planning anything. I'm burying our mother, the mother you already buried once, fraudulently 2.5 years ago." I kept my voice low, aware of the people still lingering. The mother whose house you sold, whose money you stole, whose entire life you erased while she was still alive. His face went pale. "I don't know what you think you know. I know everything, so does my attorney. So does the state's attorney, who's very interested in prosecuting elder fraud. So does the judge who'll be hearing our civil case next month." I stepped closer. Mom gave a 3-hour deposition before she died. Every detail, every document, every lie you told, it's all on record now, permanently. She was incompetent. Dr. Morrison declared her. Dr. Morrison, who signed a death certificate for a woman who was alive, who filed false documents, who's currently under investigation by the medical board. I smiled, and it was the same smile I'd given him on that phone call 2 years ago. "You didn't just steal from Mom, Marcus. You committed fraud on such a spectacular scale that you involved doctors, lawyers, insurance companies, government agencies, and you documented everything because you thought you'd gotten away with it." He looked like he was going to be sick. "What do you want?" "I don't want anything. Mom wanted justice. She wanted the truth on record. She wanted everyone to know what you did." I paused. "And she wanted you to live with the consequences, all of them, legal, financial, and moral. I'm your brother. You were Mom's son. That didn't stop you from killing her on paper." Jessica appeared then, touching Marcus's arm, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes sharp with calculation. "We should go. This isn't the place." They left together, Marcus looking back once with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, or the dawning realization that his perfect crime had an imperfect victim, one who'd stayed alive just long enough to make sure he'd pay. After everyone else had gone, I stood alone in the funeral home's viewing room. The casket held my mother's body, her real body this time, not a legal fiction. In my purse was the envelope she'd given me years ago, the one I'd finally opened the day after she died. Inside had been a letter, written in her neat teacher's handwriting, dated 3 years ago, before Marcus had filed the fake death certificate, before she'd moved in with me, before any of this had started. A letter that began, "If you're reading this, I'm really gone. And if I'm really gone, it means I survived long enough to make sure the truth survived with me." The letter explained everything, how she'd suspected what Marcus was planning, how she'd documented her own competency with multiple doctors, how she'd created a trail of evidence that would be impossible to deny. how she'd chosen to let him think he'd won so he'd keep committing crimes, digging himself deeper, creating an undeniable pattern of fraud. Let him have his fake funeral, she'd written. Let him celebrate my death while I'm still alive. Let him get comfortable with his lies, because the truth is patient, Eleanor. It can wait, and when it finally comes out, it will be devastating. She'd been right, about all of it. I left the funeral home as the rain picked up, washing the March streets clean. Behind me, the casket held a woman who'd been declared dead once before she actually died. Ahead of me was a courtroom where the truth would finally get its day. Mom had asked me once what justice looked like. I told her it looked like accountability, consequences, truth prevailing over lies. But standing in that rain, I realized justice looked like something simpler. A woman who'd been erased, choosing to be remembered. A mother who'd been stolen from choosing to be found. A life that had been ended on paper, refusing to end in reality until the person living it decided it was time. That was justice. And it was coming for Marcus whether he was ready or not. The courtroom on the 3rd floor of Hartford Superior Court smelled like old wood and broken families. I'd been sitting in courtrooms like this one for 6 months now. Civil court for the estate case, criminal court for the fraud charges, family court for the competency hearings that no longer mattered because the person whose competency was in question was dead. Really dead this time. Permanently, irreversibly dead in a way that even Marcus couldn't dispute. But her testimony lived on. That was the thing about depositions. The thing Marcus hadn't counted on. You can't cross-examine a dead woman, but you can play her recorded words in court. And those words carry the weight of someone who has nothing left to lose and everything left to say. The judge, a woman named Patricia Morales, who'd been on the bench for 20 years and had the expression of someone who'd seen every variety of human cruelty, sat with Mom's letter in front of her. The letter from the envelope. The one Mom had written 3 years ago, anticipating everything that would happen, explaining everything she'd done. Martha Chen stood at our table, 78 years old and sharp as broken glass, presenting the case like she was conducting a symphony of evidence. Marcus sat across the aisle with Martin Ashworth, who had stopped looking smug somewhere around the 3rd exhibit, the fake death certificate, the fraudulent estate documents, the bank statements showing systematic theft. "Your Honor," Martha said, her voice carrying that particular authority of someone who knows they've already won. "What we have here is not a simple case of family disagreement or even ordinary elder abuse. What we have is a son who decided his mother's continued existence was inconvenient and took active, calculated steps to erase her from legal existence while she remained physically alive." She clicked to the next slide on her presentation. A timeline. November 8th, 2022, fraudulent death certificate filed. November 15th, 2022, insurance claims initiated. December 2022, house listed for sale. January 2023, estate accounts accessed and liquidated. Each date marked with documentation, each transaction traced and verified. "Mr. Hartwell didn't just steal from his mother," Martha continued. "He committed what I can only describe as a murder without a body. He killed Catherine Hartwell on paper and then proceeded to dismantle her life piece by piece, all while she was living with her daughter, breathing, eating, watching television, reading books, and documenting every single thing he was doing." Marcus shifted in his seat. Martin Ashworth whispered something to him that he ignored. "The defendant will argue that he believed his mother was incompetent," Martha said, "that he was acting in her best interests, that the death certificate was a medical error, not fraud, that he had legal authority granted by documents his mother signed." She paused for effect. "But we have Catherine Hartwell's own testimony, given 4 months before her actual death, explaining in meticulous detail how her son coerced those signatures, manipulated medical professionals, and constructed a false narrative of decline." The judge looked at Marcus. "Mr. Hartwell, I've read your mother's deposition, all 73 pages of it. I've watched the video recording. I saw a woman who was articulate, detailed, emotionally present, and very clear about what had happened to her." She leaned forward. How do you explain filing a death certificate for someone who is demonstrably alive? Marcus started to stand, but Martin Ashworth pulled him back down and spoke instead. Your Honor, my client relied on medical professionals who signed documents at your client's request without ever examining the patient, Judge Morales interrupted. Dr. Morrison's medical license has been suspended pending investigation. His deposition makes clear that he signed that death certificate based solely on information Mr. Hartwell provided without verifying any of it. That's not medical error. That's conspiracy to commit fraud. The criminal charges had been filed 3 months ago. Wire fraud, identity theft, filing false documents, elder abuse, theft. Marcus was facing up to 15 years in federal prison. Martin Ashworth had tried to negotiate a plea deal. Restitution, community service, probation. The prosecutor had laughed in his face. But the criminal case wasn't why we were here today. Today was about the will. The real one. The one Mom had created 4 years ago with a different lawyer, a woman named Rebecca Torres, who specialized in protecting vulnerable adults from exactly what Marcus had tried to do. Martha pulled out a document. This is Catherine Hartwell's actual last will and testament, executed in 2021, witnessed by 3 independent parties, and filed with a trust company for safekeeping. Not the will Marcus Hartwell produced. Not the one that conveniently left everything to him, the real one. She handed copies to the judge and to Martin Ashworth, whose face went carefully blank as he read. I'd seen the will already. Mom had shown it to me the week before she died, explaining each provision with the kind of satisfaction that comes from planning your revenge perfectly. The house Marcus had sold. The proceeds were to be recovered and donated to the Connecticut Elder Rights Project. Every penny. Mom had specifically written that she didn't want her daughter to profit from Marcus's crime. Let it help other people, she'd said. Let something good come from this ugliness. Her savings account, her life insurance, Dad's pension, all of it was designated for a scholarship fund at the elementary school where she'd taught for 35 years. The Catherine Hartwell Teaching Award for educators who showed exceptional compassion for struggling students. The jewelry Marcus had distributed to Jessica and their daughter. All of it was to be returned and given to Mom's sister in Florida, the one person Marcus had systematically excluded from Mom's life during her final years. And then there was the final provision, the one Mom had spent the most time crafting. Marcus William Hartwell, the will read, is hereby designated as the executor of my estate, with full responsibility for all debts, legal obligations, and consequences arising from my death. This includes any and all restitution, damages, legal fees, and penalties resulting from actions taken in my name or regarding my affairs. I watched understanding dawn on Marcus's face as Martha explained it to the court. Catherine Hartwell knew her son would file a fraudulent death certificate, Martha said. She knew he'd steal her money, sell her house, dismantle her life, and she made sure that when the truth came out, he would be legally responsible for every single consequence. Every dollar stolen has to be repaid by Marcus. Every legal fee incurred in correcting the fraud, Marcus's responsibility. The IRS penalties for the false estate filing, his problem. The restoration costs for the documentary fraud, his bill. She gave him exactly what he wanted, Martha continued, and there was something like admiration in her voice. She made him the executor. She gave him control, and then she made that control into a trap. Because an executor is personally liable for estate misconduct. Every crime he committed thinking he was getting away with it, every dollar he stole thinking she'd never know, all of it is now his legal obligation to correct. With his own money, his own assets, his own future. Martin Ashworth was frantically paging through the will, looking for loopholes that didn't exist. Mom had worked with Rebecca Torres for months, closing every possible escape route. The document was airtight. The defendant stole approximately $600,000 from his mother's estate, Martha said. He'll have to repay all of it, plus interest, plus penalties. His house, the one bought partially with his mother's stolen money, will likely need to be sold. His retirement accounts will be garnished. He'll be paying restitution for the next 20 years, assuming he avoids prison time, which seems unlikely given the criminal charges. Judge Morales looked at the will for a long moment. When she looked up, her expression was something between disgust and grim satisfaction. "Mr. Hartwell, your mother has given you a gift," she said. "She could have left you nothing. She could have excluded you entirely, given everything to your sister, made you irrelevant. Instead, she gave you responsibility. She gave you the obligation to fix what you broke. She gave you every single consequence of your actions, wrapped up in legal language you can't escape." She signed the order validating Mom's real will. "The estate will be administered according to Catherine Hartwell's wishes. Mr. Hartwell, as executor, you are hereby ordered to begin restitution proceedings immediately. All assets obtained through fraudulent means are to be recovered and distributed as specified. This court will maintain oversight until every provision is satisfied." She looked at Marcus with something that might have been pity if it wasn't so clearly contempt. "Your mother is dead, Mr. Hartwell. You tried to kill her years before her heart actually stopped. You failed. She stayed alive just long enough to make sure you'd spend the rest of your life paying for that failure." Literally. Court adjourned. Marcus sat frozen in his seat while people filed out around him. Jessica had stopped coming to the hearings 2 months ago, right around the time their bank accounts were frozen pending the fraud investigation. Melissa was away at college, probably trying to pretend her father wasn't all over the news as the man who'd murdered his mother on paper to steal her house. I walked past Marcus's table on my way out. He didn't look at me, didn't speak, just sat there with Martin Ashworth gathering papers and whispering about appeals that would never work. Outside the courthouse, Martha put her arm around my shoulders. The June sun was warm, the kind of perfect summer day that makes you believe in renewal and second chances and justice that sometimes, occasionally, actually works. "Your mother was extraordinary," Martha said. "I've never seen anyone plan their own vindication so thoroughly." "She had a lot of time to think about it," I said. 2.5 years of being legally dead gives you perspective." We walked to Martha's car in comfortable silence. In my purse was the final letter Mom had written. Not the legal one, but the personal one. The one she'd left specifically for me. "Eleanor," it read in her perfect teacher's handwriting, "if you're reading this, it means I'm really gone, and Marcus is finally understanding what he's done. Don't feel sorry for him. He made his choices. He chose greed over love, control over compassion, lies over truth. These are his consequences. He earned them. But you, my darling daughter, you chose differently. You chose to stay with me when I was being erased. You chose truth when lies were easier. You chose love when love was complicated and exhausting and terrifying. You are the inheritance that matters, not money, not houses, not jewelry. You are what I'm leaving behind in this world. The proof that I raised someone who understood that people matter more than property, that dignity matters more than convenience, that love sometimes means holding someone's hand through their erasure and then spending years making sure the truth survives. Thank you for letting me be alive. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for choosing justice, even when it would have been easier to let him win. You are my real legacy. Everything else is just paperwork. I love you. I loved you when you were small, and I love you now. I loved you when I was alive, and I love you from whatever comes after. That kind of love doesn't end with death. Not real death, not even fake death. It just keeps going like energy that can't be destroyed, only transformed. Go live your life now. Be happy. Be free. Be yourself without the weight of caring for your dying mother. And if you ever doubt whether this was worth it, remember, Marcus got what he deserved, but you got what you needed. The knowledge that you did everything right, that's worth more than any inheritance. All my love now and always, Mom. P.S. I hope you smiled when he called to say I was dead. I hope you smiled the way I would have smiled, knowing exactly what was coming. I had smiled, and I'd keep smiling, because Mom was right. Marcus had gotten exactly what he'd earned, and I'd gotten what I needed. The knowledge that some people stay dead when they die, and some people's truths outlive them. Mom's truth was alive in court records, in scholarship funds, in the Connecticut Elder Rights Project that would help other vulnerable people avoid what she'd endured. Her truth was alive in Martha Chen's continuing advocacy work, in the changes to medical oversight that her case had inspired, in the prosecutors who now knew what to look for when families tried to erase their elderly members. And her truth was alive in me, walking out of that courthouse into June sunshine, free for the first time in years, knowing that justice sometimes takes longer than a lifetime, but arrives anyway. Marcus would spend the rest of his life paying for killing his mother on paper. I would spend the rest of mine knowing I'd helped her stay alive long enough to make sure the truth survived. That seemed like a fair trade. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us most are the ones who hurt us deepest. Catherine Hartwell spent her final years being systematically erased by her own son, a man who valued property over people and convenience over compassion. But she refused to disappear quietly. She chose to document her own erasure, to stay alive long enough to ensure the truth would outlive her, to transform her death into justice. What would you have done in Eleanor's position? Would you have fought immediately, risking your mother's final months being consumed by legal battles? Or would you have chosen strategic silence, letting the enemy think they'd won while gathering evidence for a reckoning they'd never see coming? And what about Catherine herself? Would you have had the strength to live as a ghost in your own life, legally dead while still breathing, just to make sure your abuser faced consequences? This story isn't just about one family's dysfunction. It's about how elder abuse happens in plain sight, wrapped in the language of concern and care. It's about how easily vulnerable people can be erased from their own lives when the systems meant to protect them are manipulated by those they trust most. But it's also about resistance, about refusing to be forgotten, about the kind of love that fights back even from beyond the grave. Catherine Hartwell's legacy isn't the money or the house or the legal precedents her case established. It's the reminder that some truths are stronger than lies, some loves outlast death, and some people refuse to stay buried no matter how deep the grave. If this story moved you, please follow the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like Catherine's need to be told, so that other families recognize the warning signs before it's too late. Comment below and let me know what you think. Was Eleanor right to wait? Or should she have exposed Marcus sooner? Your thoughts and engagement help these important stories reach more people. Thank you for listening, and remember, the truth always finds a way to survive, even when those who carry it don't.